Welcome to The Point with Mick Rich. Today I'm excited. I've got my good buddy here, Joe Abbin, and he is author of Albuquerque Blue. We're going to be talking about crime in New Mexico, in the state of New Mexico, for the city, but also the national ramifications, because what we see here is happening across the country. And I'm excited about what we're going to be talking about. But one of the last, we're going to talk about is, and it's never covered in any programs that are out there, is the true heartache that are men and women that are first responders that deal with, maybe not on a daily basis and maybe not on a weekly, but most likely at least once a month. There's some true heartache that they deal with, and they have to do with it. And as an employer, I've run across that before, where I've had to give just horrible news to coworkers, to staff, and it's not easy to do. And it really kind of shakes you up a little bit. And we're going to be talking about that. And then the other item is, I remember decades ago we talked about peace officers. How did we go from peace officers to police officers? We're going to be touching base about that as well. So I'm excited. But the most thing I'm excited about, and I want to share with everybody, Marion and I are now grandparents. Our son and daughter-in-law, Jim and Camila, had their first child. We are now grandparents. And that's big news. My wife is really excited. And it brings back how nervous I was holding our kids, when they were small. So again, I'm looking forward to it. And Joe, glad to have you on the program. Could you just tell us a brief thing about few minutes about your book?
Oh, certainly. Mick, I spent 30 years out at Sandia Labs, but somewhere in the middle there, they had an article in the Lab News about that the Albuquerque Police Department had a reserve program. And I'd always been interested in police work, and I had police in my background. My grandfather was a police officer in Central Park, horse patrolman. And I thought, well, that sounds like a great way to maybe give back to the community that'd be more in style with my basic personality. I tried being a probation officer for a year. That didn't work. I got too involved with my clients. I either wanted to shoot them or take them to the circus.
I can understand. I can relate to that.
Well, there was all kinds of situations, and I found I didn't have much control over their situation. So I joined the police department in 1984, and then I left Sandia in 1994, and I founded my own engineering company and actually opened a bookstore that later turned into a publishing company. I've had a good time doing that. I've learned so much. 36 years total on the police department, and when I retired at the end of December, this last December, I was the oldest person by far on the police department at 79. And I was still on the street, which there was pros and cons of that.
Right. So, Joe, some of the things I want to chat about today is that, when we talk about Albuquerque, New Mexico, and for our viewers, is that Albuquerque is in the top 10 worst cities in the country for crime. And just down the road in El Paso, they are in the top 10 for safest cities. And then in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, who doesn't know someone that's been a victim of crime? Just recently, we had 2 construction equipment trailers stolen right out of our yard. And then the only reason that I see that crime isn't front and center that it once was a year ago is that we're all focused on the COVID-19 crisis. And so that's replaced crime. But it doesn't mean that crime's been solved. It just means that they've shifted the focus, just like a magician who is, trying to figure out where that, where the pea is under that shell. And they're doing that with COVID, so we're not looking at crime. But again, that's not a strategy of focusing on COVID-19. So what do we need to do, Joe? What are the things that Albuquerque can do, but across the country can do to solve this crime?
Well, the book was a result of actually that 36 years on the police department, and also I spent 5 years on the Foothills Community Policing Council, and last year as chairman. I also learned a lot from that. I learned what bothered people, what they were interested in, what disturbed them. And in doing the research for the book, as you pointed out, we're number one in the country as of 2018, which is the last year's available. Unfortunately, the FBI stats for 2019 won't be out till the end of this month, but projected we'll still be close to number one in property crime. We're number 4 in violent crime. That's in the entire United States. And as you pointed out, our neighbors around us are nowhere near what we are. El Paso was often thought, gee, it ought to be a pit. It's
so
got
what
all.
do we? So what? Where do we? How do we get? So we're the. You know, I'm not saying down from number 10. You know, number 1. But I'm saying is how do we get to be one of the top 10 safest communities in the country? What are we going to do?
That's the right question. And actually, in the ABQ Blues, I went through where the problems are. And the problems are not just the police department, it's with the culture, it's with the correctional system, it's with our judicial system. There's problems in all 3 areas there that have created a perfect storm to make us as terrible as we are. And so, you need to fix all of those. In simplest terms, we need more cops, more arrests, more prosecutions, and more incarcerations. We can't.
Right.
There's the old Richard Nixon's old little joke was, the cause of crime is criminals.
Well, right,
and that there's no getting around that. And if we're in our houses looking through the bars and the criminals are on the street, what do you expect?
Oh, I believe I understand what you're saying. I'm saying I am not going to live in bars, behind bars, otherwise I'm going to be a criminal. But in New Mexico, criminals aren't behind bars.
They aren't.
They're out on the streets. So number 1 is that I look at is it surprised me we had 2 trailers stolen.
Yes.
And actually one was recovered, which shocked us. I have lost trucks, I have lost equipment, I have lost all sorts of things, and you never see it. You and I chatted one time that there it was at one of the grocery stores, they had an armed robbery, and they said, what's the point of reporting it? We're going to have to stay overnight. But we have to solve the crime. We got to put the criminals behind bars. I think I shared with you one time. I recovered my own truck. I got the people to stop and walk away from my truck. I didn't have a weapon. I just got them to stop and walk away from my truck. They knew who they were. I identified them. They said, you know, if you any of these people look familiar? I said, yeah, the groom. They had their wedding album. Right? And they knew who it was. They never prosecuted that individual. So number 1, you got to be prosecuting the criminals. You can't just walk away.
That's right.
Number 2, you got to arrest them. That's the way I see. Number 3 is you have to have a way that we have to have good paying jobs. If we don't have good paying jobs, what's the point? You're saying, well, crime doesn't pay, but if there's no jobs, we got to have jobs, right?
Right. And crime discourages recruiting. I can tell you, recruiting for Sandia for a huge staff there, and then as an individual in a small company, that, for instance, when I left Sandia, we were in the middle of a major crime wave then. I don't know if you remember. That was early 90s.
Yeah.
And we were in terrible shape, roughly the same shape we're in right now. Nationally and locally.
Right.
And you have a hard time getting quality people to bring their family to Albuquerque if they don't feel safe.
That's right. So, and we need to start looking at wrapping this up. I'm excited that, and I keep saying excited because I am, because anytime you can solve a problem, a challenge facing the community, that's grounds to be excited. Our problems that we face in our community are all solvable. It's not like if they're not solvable, we'll say, you know, we can't do it. We can. Attorney General Barr has this Operation Legend.
Absolutely.
And he's having an impact. The first thing I saw was that he came on board and they arrested I won't say gentleman, that criminal, the murderer that killed, what was her name?
Jackie, and I can't think.
Right, Jackie in her driveway, arrested her immediately. So we can turn this around, but it has to do what you said was a commitment from our community leaders for enforcement, prosecution. It has to do with the judges, that we keep them behind bars, the violent criminals. And then we need to have a way where people can say, I don't want to live this way.
And we have to
good
take
paying
the criminals
jobs.
off the street. That's the end of the deal. I'm all for rehabilitation, but it should be done while they're in jail instead of out for repeat offenders. They've already demonstrated that.
I'm just going to share with you one real quick thing here is, we've hired people with checkered past.
Sure.
And I can't get them. We're doing a project at Kirtland Air Force Base. We can't get them on base because of a checkered past. They've turned the corner. They've turned their lives around. What we want to do is take these people. These aren't people that can't be rehabilitated. We can't. This is how we're going to do it.
They've
We're going to
demonstrated.
take these people and we're going to turn them around. We're going to put the criminals behind bars, and that's what it's going to take. I'm excited, Joe, having you on the program, and I look forward to the next segment.
Right bootlegs.
And he's going to
He's
take
got
off
running
running.
room, and he will run for the pylon dives. I believe it's a scoreless.
Here's the handoff, cutting across the 10 to the 5, a stiff arm to the end zone and in.
Second down and 10. They'll hand off to Gorey. Gorey's got some beautiful blocking. He turns on the jet. Turbo engage. Touchdown, Elijah Gorey.
Got a screen. Brown
Out
is
of
set up
yards.
nicely. Two blockers in front. Brown cuts it back 45, 40, 35, 30. He might take it to the house. LaShawn Brown is gone.
Tied out there. Trio's going to keep it this time, and he got through one, and he's going to hurdle into the end zone. It's a time for Trujillo as he steps out of the pocket, looking and fires too far. It was tipped, but then it's caught, and all the room in the world. Touchdown. Off to Acosta, has all the room and is in. Touchdown for the win. Hernandez up and through, and Centennial have won it. What a football game, though. Big heart. Down a little bit here in the last few moments. Oh, there's a big right, and down goes Arturo.
Well, I'm going to the frontier, walking to the cashier, order up a root beer and a number one. Cover it with green stuff, one scoop is not enough. Find a booth is real tough, back by the Duke. Meet my family, meet my friends in the quirkiest restaurant I have ever been. All of Albuquerque's favorite spot, it's the Frontier Restaurant.
The Frontier Restaurant is a proud supporter of ProView Sports Network.
Welcome back to The Point with Mick Rich, and today we have Joe Abbin with us, author of Albuquerque Blue. We're going to be talking about continuation about crime. And one of the things I want to talk about today, Joe, is the federal oversight of the Albuquerque Police Department. I know our state, our community isn't the only one that has federal oversight. And there's a reason for it. There was problems, huge problems with it. We hit the national news on what was going on with our police department, and it's a mess, and it was a mess, and it's turning around. But we need to get back. Remember, we're talking about Albuquerque Police Department. This is our police department, and we need to have our own oversight of it. We don't need Washington telling us how to live our lives. So, Joe, I want to chat with you a little bit about the oversight. One of the things that you and I have talked about over the years is, and we've known each other for a few years, is that it's the old 80-20 rule. That what got us into this problem isn't a systemic problem across the whole Albuquerque Police Department. It's a small group of individuals that's causing the problem. That old 80-20 rule. 20% is causing 80% of the problems. So is that the way you see it?
Well, 2015 is when the court-approved settlement agreement was signed between the Department of Justice and the city of Albuquerque, including the Albuquerque Police Department. Because prior to 2015, the city had paid out $60 to $70 million in excessive use of force and wrongful death suits. So it was the Department of Justice, in their determination, we had a culture of aggression on the police department.
What do you think? I understand, okay, Washington, right, back then, that was Attorney General Holder, right? And so, but we're talking, what was your take on it?
Well, it's interesting. Policing is different than most occupations. Most occupations, you don't have to use force on another human being as part of the job. So there is that aspect of it. And in most calls, in most cases, in most interfaces with the public, you don't have to use force. But there's probably 5 to 10% of the time in effecting an arrest, you run into non-compliance, or anytime there's a foot pursuit, you're almost always going to be a fight at the end. That's if you got any breath left. So it's a little different. So it was considered excessive, but there's no real standards as far as how many deaths are okay per 100,000 people. That's interesting. There's no benchmarks there, and so certain cities have a big problem. Some cities have never had a wrongful death.
Here's one of the things that we've had a discussion in our business and it was the first time we brought in a consultant. We were doing annual goal setting, and the question was accidents. And we said our goal for our company was 0 accidents, 0 injuries, 0 accidents. And our vice president said, well, 0 is a stringent number. And we all said, okay, Bobby, how many is acceptable? How serious of an accident is okay? Yeah. And all of a sudden he goes, I get it, it's 0. So really what we should be talking about is getting that number to 0. Remember, I'm nowhere. Somebody said, how did you get that guy to pull over and walk away from your truck and you didn't have a gun? And number one, I never got out of my truck. And number two, we exchanged a few words. You can imagine what was said. But and then the third item was that truck can only do 50 miles an hour. So they couldn't outrun anybody. And they knew that. But they walked away. But the idea of understanding how to de-escalate and how to do that. And I understand that needs to be done. I'm not a police officer, never was. I'm not going to tell any police officer how to do their job. But what you're talking about is the goal setting is 0. Then how do you get there? And the first one is, in my business, I get onto a job, I can see who isn't safe, and they're not on the job anymore. So, Joe, how do we get this?
You do have to change the culture, Mick, as you mentioned, and you do have to have standards. You do have to start keeping score. That's a big difference between what we were doing before in the police department. We didn't have the metrics within or without, as to who's doing what or what we're doing.
Oh, that's huge.
It's huge, and so one of the big pluses of the CASA, they call it, the Court-Approved Settlement Agreement, is they're actually keeping score, and the metrics and the data, being data-driven, is a major part of that. The other part is de-escalation skills. That was a major part of my in-service training for the last 5 years, and also dealing with the mentally ill. Dealing with the mentally ill is tough because you're not talking about rational people that are going to respond to rational requests.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And another thing the police department deals with all the time is they're not necessarily mentally ill, but they're under they're drunk, they're under some substance thing, and they're not acting rationally, and they want to fight. That seems to be a universal deal. And so I don't think we'll ever get to number zero as far as use of force. Even with strict guidelines and all the things we've done in the last 5 years, the average number of people the police department have killed in Albuquerque has stayed the same as it was before. It's 5 to 6 people per year, and it's frustrating that we can't seem to beat that.
So,
now we have reduced the other uses of force were not fatal, but it is frustrating that the number of people that have been killed by the police has remained about the same. There are some hardcore cases and some calls that there's really the officer is left with no choice. And it's a tough one. It's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and say you could have done better. Everybody, you're looking at the.
You know what? You're there and you're in the middle of this, going through, dealing with individuals, and you're saying, man, and then it amazes me, the interaction the police department has. You never know who you're going to be facing. When you walk up to a car, you walk up to a door, and know the situation you just don't know. And so trying to step back and deal with it, those are huge.
Well, you always try to step back is the key deal. It doesn't hurt to retreat a little and try to figure out where to go when you can.
Right.
But
the
often
other
you don't
one
have a
that
choice.
I always thought that I did, especially when I was on the campaign trail, was I always took my hat off.
You didn't take your shirt off. That's the way the fighters, they wouldn't take their shirt off.
But I took my hat off, and it's like hat in hand.
Yeah.
Right? It kind of takes, for whatever reason, kind of de-escalates that. One of the things I want to share with you, too, is that I'm working with a group of folks up in northern New Mexico on developing a police academy for training police officers in northern New Mexico. This is going to be for the communities. And one of the things that I brought up was, we talked about a police academy, and I said, we need to get back to what we have is peace officers. Do you remember, this was 30 years ago, we had peace officers.
I've got a great picture of my grandfather standing in front of a porch. He's got his riding pants on. He was a horse officer. And he's holding a dog in his arms that another kid had presented him with. Another kid and his dog, the dog's pulling on his pants. And they're talking. Now, in New York, there's a tremendous foot patrol. Because it's very practical there. It's super high density, not a lot of room for traffic.
But again, what we're talking about, Joe, is getting back to that idea of we don't have police officers, we have peace officers. We talk about those individuals, our first responders, are keeping the peace, not enforcing the laws, keeping the peace. It gets back to that, and I think that to me is huge. So how do we get that mindset from a police officer to a peace officer, and then also throw this in? You touched on it, and I want to talk about it too, was the mentally ill. I say police officers, but peace officers, they're having to do with the mentally ill. And a good friend of mine down in southern New Mexico, her son was schizophrenic.
Yes.
And he was going after his mom with a baseball bat. The Las Cruces showed up, tried to de-escalate. He came after him, and they shot and killed him. And remember Hyde, that
Oh,
we
John
have
Hyde,
here.
yes. Ooh.
And I've known schizophrenics over, the course of my lifetime.
I have them. I've had 2 of them in my family.
And so we understand those challenges.
John Hyde was an interesting case. Those 2 officers who were killed didn't realize that John Hyde had already killed 3 people.
Oh, that's right.
And that he was laying in ambush
That's
for them.
right.
They were on a pickup order, and they'd been briefed by John Hyde's psychiatrist as his mental
Right.
state. He said he was going to kill people. Those 2 officers were seasoned officers, but they had probably grown either tombstone courage or they just gotten careless because they approached straight up, and he was hiding behind a tree, and boom, boom.
Guess what? And so those are the
terrible.
things, but how...
No de-escalation skills would have worked on him. That's probably
and
one of
that's correct, and I agree with that. But what we're talking about here, when we talk about the federal oversight of all things that are going on, we're talking about defunding the police. What we're talking about is getting our department here back to being peace officers, and getting to them, and when we as a community look at them and say they're us, and that's what we're talking about. And today I want to make it clear is our police, our men and women serving in uniform on the streets, they're us. We've got to have their back too. That's what they're counting on. This is Mick Rich, To the Point. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again. The next segment, Joe. Thank you very much.
Smith back to pass. Throws over to O'Toole on the slant cut. O'Toole breaks a tackle. 5, touchdown. 26-yard pass.
3 yards to go. The hand off to Joseph, and he's in. Touchdown, Matadors.
Figueroa's got the distance. Yes!
Oh man, this beat is crazy.
3rd and goal. Benavides rolls. Fires to the end zone, and it's caught. They could end the game.
They're going for a pass. They're not going to take any time.
And Harris has some movement if he wants to run. Instead, he's going to fire. Instead, he's going to go to the end zone, and it's caught. Touchdown. Works on 1st down and 10. A draw play handoff to the outside, and a nice spin move, and look out. Some room down the sideline. Shot out of a cannon all the way. The last. Play action as Petty's looking, and he fires, and he's got Hoffman across midfield, and it's a foot race now. Hoffman's going to race down the sideline, and no one's going to touch him. Touchdown.
And 1. Quarterback. He coughed up the football. It's going to be a scoop and score for Sandia.
Every week, but the kid's got tremendous poise and potential.
No doubt.
Here to see if they try to reverse again. And they do. Garcia's with it. He's got some block down the right side, some room. One man to beat, cuts it back at the 40 to the 45. Oñate, man, fumbled.
Oh my gosh.
Cougar picks it up and is going to run it in for a score. That's Jerome Benavides with a 50-yard return.
Wow. Only 2nd down and 4.
Harris gonna fire down the near side, looking for Phillips towards the end zone. Touch.
Don't sacrifice quality of flavor when you're in a hurry. Golden Pride offers ribs, fried chicken, green and red chili breakfast burritos, and Frontier Cinnabons. 4 great locations or visit us online at goldenpride@abq.com. Golden Pride Barbecue Chicken and Ribs, proud supporter of ProView Sports Network.
This is Mick Rich, and welcome back to The Point with Mick Rich. I've got my good buddy here, Joe Abbin, with us. We're chatting about law enforcement, the crime, what to do, and there's a lot we can do in our state and our community. But one of the things that really out of our realms, and that is transnational criminal organizations. And what we're talking about isn't just the Mexican cartels, but today they are, when we talk about transnational criminal organizations, they're coming from Mexico, Central America, South America, they're coming from Asia. We don't have it, I don't believe, too much here, but maybe on the East Coast, New York, Russian cartels. But it is a mess, and this is part of driving the crime in New Mexico. And Joe, I want to talk to you about this. What do we do about these? What is the city, the county, and the state doing about transnational criminal organizations?
You know, Mick, approximately 10 to 15 years ago, we had a group called Los Sueños, and they were drug importers and general criminals, and they were responsible for 17 murders in Albuquerque, 30 individuals, and it took a joint task force between the city, the county, and the feds, and they were prosecuted under the so-called RICO laws, racketeering and corrupt organizations, and it took a lot of work to bring them to heel, and actually, since they were prosecuted under federal law, they went to federal prison. And it's interesting how when you use federal law, because they are a lot stricter as far as keeping the criminals in, the criminals start singing on each other quite handily, and that helps. And it takes, so in that case, and in all cases, when you're dealing with an organized crime, it depends how organized they are. Those guys had a command structure, and they had very strict intergroup discipline. The other ones are scared about. It's manpower intensive to put the intelligence on them, to keep track of them. We've had different units, organized crime. Some of it's white collar crime. They're the hardest of all to deal with, because
I understand that, but when I read about these transnational criminal organizations, I thought one interesting was the Asian organization, and they had to do with money laundering, which I thought was just tongue in cheek. I thought that was interesting, but it was that organization had to do with money laundering. But the other one that I noticed was that we have these organizations coming across the border, bringing the drugs up, but we're not just talking about drugs. We're talking about human trafficking, sex trafficking. When we talk about drugs, it's not just marijuana, it's heroin, fentanyl, methamphetamines.
Right.
It is all of this coming across the border and then taking cash back across. When we talk about a porous border, we talk about, I look at it and say, we've actually got an armed incursion on the southern border with these drug cartels. They're not, these members of these organizations are not going across the checkpoints because they know they're going to be stopped. They're coming across the, coming between the checkpoints. They're coming into our country. They're bringing the drugs. They're using local gangs as a distribution. They're the wholesalers, and you have that. I think there's one organization that is actually getting into the dealing at more of a street level. But I'm saying that there's so much money involved that this can compromise.
Oh, payoffs, that's a part of it. We also have local manufacturers of drugs. Meth, it turns out, is a relatively easy manufacturer, and just in the time that I was on, we had several mobile meth labs or even storage units rented just for the purpose of manufacturing meth. We had motorhomes. This is what in the heck was the crime show? Anyway, where they were
right.
they
Yeah,
were
it was,
manufacturing in a motorhome. Right.
That's correct.
And,
But when we also talk about sex trafficking,
yeah,
so here it was, my daughter was down in Hobbs doing a rotation for to become a PA and she's down there for OBGYN, and she was doing prenatal checkup, and there was a young gal, 15, 16, with her husband who is in his 20s, and the husband stayed with her because she didn't speak English. And then my daughter went to Roswell for a pediatric rotation, and my daughter was sharing with her this story about what she saw. And this gal turned, the physician turned to my daughter and said, that's sex trafficking. That young gal is being sex trafficked.
right.
This is what we have going on too. So this is a big deal. So is the city and the county and the state equipped to deal with these organizations?
You know, the thing that makes dealing with sex trafficking tough is that there's not very many complainants. There's in the foothills area, for instance, we had one lady that pointed out that there was, she felt it was a big problem in foothills, but we had no complaints from citizens. There's nobody said, well, it's happening around me, or it's not, or it's what. And that lady, I followed up on her deal, and the number of massage parlors, for instance, was a measure of that. A lot of them work out of massage parlors. A lot of them are freelancers. I probably dealt with over 500 prostitutes, all the way from the classy ones that are call girls and that work at the Hilton, to the ones that work on the street, to the ones that work in a more structured environment like the massage parlors. In foothills, there were approximately 11 massage parlors. I was surprised to find.
You know what surprised me was I was in the Northeast Heights, and there was a massage parlor, and it was open at like 10 at night.
That's one of the tip-offs.
Yeah, but I guess what we talked about earlier was it's not just about our peace officers and it's their job. It's our job.
Oh, yeah.
It's our responsibility too. It's our responsibility. This is in my old home. This was like 25 years ago. They did a major bust at the end of the street, and I couldn't believe it. It turned out that there was a guy wanted for murder. They were doing drug dealing out of his house. My bedroom was in the back. Our bedroom was at the back of the house. Some neighbors, their bedrooms were at the front. And they said, we saw taxis pull up in the middle of the night going up to this house. And I'm thinking, why in the world are you not calling the police department to say this is what's going on? It is our responsibility too.
Right, we're the eyes and the ears. Nobody's closer to our neighbors than ourselves. And for instance, in my own neighborhood, I've told many people, keep a log of what's going on, and then when you think you've established a pattern, then they'll pay attention to you. Because otherwise it looks, there's a lot of calls that are, the boyfriend's wants to get even with his girlfriend, said she's hooking in the house. And that if you should, you know, there's a lot of false starts, and they don't have the manpower or person power to follow all the leads. But if they can build up a decent log of activities and gather whatever intel they can, like license plates, for instance, it helps. And you're right, we're looking out for each other. I mentioned, and of those massage parlors, those 11 or whatever there were, or 7 of them, I think, there was four of them had the Christmas lights on all year round, and they're open 24 hours. That's kind of a tip-off that they're probably not a legit.
Guess what? That's right. But what do you remember that old Western with Gary Cooper, High Noon?
Yeah.
Do you remember? There it was, Gary Cooper, all alone, down on Main Street. I don't know about you, but I remember as a kid saying, where are all the people? Why aren't they there backing them up? Because if everybody came up and stood side by side with Gary Cooper, you know, it'd be a whole different ballgame. But here it is. Here we are, 2020, and people are hiding behind their curtains and not willing to step up. And this is what it's going to take. We can't just count on it. So what we're talking about,
Finding witnesses is important to solving any crime, whether it's human trafficking or not. And it's often hard to find witnesses because the community is afraid of the criminals, for one thing.
tell you what, I've had to stand my ground.
It's a spiral. It's a death spiral.
Right, and we're saying, why aren't they doing their job? And the answer is because we're not helping. Right? We gotta pitch in.
We got to work together, right?
We have to work out. And the police department, they need, our chief of police needs to reach out to all of us and say, what? We're in it all together. It's not just us. It's not just my team. It's our team. We're in it together, and this is what it's about. And same thing on the feds. I was appalled when Attorney General Barr came out here, and he had, this is before, and had great success, and our governor wouldn't meet with them, our mayor wouldn't meet with them, the chief wouldn't meet with them, and I'm saying he's out here stepping up. Here it is, Attorney General Barr is out here in Operation Legend, and our mayor, our governor aren't front and center.
And Martin Heinrich recommended that the sheriff resign for even participating with.
And I think this is unconscionable. If we're going to turn crime around, this is what we're going to do. Joe, it's exciting. I'm glad to have you on board here, talk about this segment. We're going to come back. We've got one more segment left. We're going to talk about the heartache that our men and women in uniform are facing. And I think it puts a real human side that for all of us to understand what they face on a daily basis. This is Mick Rich, and To the Point. Thank you.
Across the middle, and it's caught. Malik Phillips dancing away.
In the first half, he's been under pressure all game anyway. Smith back to pass. They're trying to set up the screen to Barker, and they've got blockers in front. Barker cuts it back. Barker in the open field, 40, 45, 50. Barker's got one man to beat. Barker may go to the house, and he will. Caden Barker touched Jordan Barker, touchdown Carlsbad.
But here we go. Let's see how he does.
Cabrales will kick off from the 40 and
drives it hard.
And here they try to see that reverse again.
He fakes it.
Oh, he's got it. He's got one man to beat and a blocker in front. 35, 40, 50, 45. He's gone. There's no Hornet that will catch him. Opening kickoff return for Slade Campos. 80 yards and.
Ball falls for Nava, puts it forward for Moyers. Moyers gets it past the keeper, and it's 2-1.
Denard all by himself. They're looking for him. They throw it in the end zone. Underthrown and caught. How about that? Mercy. Trevon Denard. Wow.
It's his night.
It's his night.
What's up? Uses that foot. No, this time she goes low. And there's a scrum there. The ball's loose. And it's up and it's in. How about that? Going top shelf.
Good dump and then a good wherewithal to keep it up. There's Jones on a good dig. Martinez. Huggins was blocked into a middle. Kept alive and then dumped back over. Let's keep playing, girls. Cross court this time from Cooperno. Jones sets to the outside. McIntosh was blocked. That's knocked back over. We'll continue the rally. Cooper on the right hand, back row, and McIntosh, a little miscommunication with Lucero. Let's see if that fires up these Cougars. Harris has some time. They'll roll out looking. Harris fires on the move, and it's complete. Slipping one is Webskowski, and another, and it's a foot race. Shot out of a cannon. Justin Webskowski. Can he take it all the way? Touchdown.
The Jaguars. There's Smith again, cuts it back. Nice run by Smith, still on his feet, going to the end zone. Touchdown.
Harris with the fake pitch, and now a run to the outside, and he's got some room. Nice move, Harris, look out. He's across the 40, a cut to midfield. He's got a blocker in front. Look out. Chance Harris, shot out of a cannon, and he's going to take it all the way. Touchdown.
The New Mexico High School Coaches Association, established in 1941, is an organization of New Mexico's best and most professional interscholastic coaches. Coaches across work daily to help our student athletes excel in the classroom, on the field of play, and in our communities. Students that participate in interscholastic activities attain higher grades, higher graduation rates, and higher wages. Responsible for the North-South All-Star Games, statewide Coaches Award Program, and providing multiple professional development opportunities for New Mexico's coaches. Be a great coach by coaching beyond the game.
Car Crafters, proud supporter of ProView Sports Network.
Are you sure we're supposed to be doing this?
Don't worry, I've watched him do it 1,000 times. Come on, what's the worst that could happen?
No! Bad dog!
Hi, welcome to Car Crafters. What happened? Don't worry, we'll make it like it never happened.
Car Crafters, it's like it never happened.
Welcome back to The Point with Mick Rich. In the 3 earlier segments, we talked about why is it that Albuquerque is the 10 worst cities in the country for crime, and El Paso's the 10 best. Talked about transnational crime organizations. What's the impact here? We talked about why is it that New Mexico and Albuquerque is under federal control. I should say mandates. And then lastly, this last segment, we're going to talk about the heartache that the men and women in uniform here in Albuquerque and across the state and country face. And I know firsthand, as an owner of a business, sometimes I have to bring bad, tough news to staff. And I've done that. I've had to go up and share with somebody. I say, hey, you know, this was my ex-partner, my partner at the time, and said, Rick, I need to chat with you. Your dad just passed away, and it's your home, and you need to head home. Your wife is waiting for you. I've had to come up to a staff member and say, your husband's had a heart attack. He's in the hospital. I'm told he's okay, but he's had a heart attack. He needs you. What can we do to help? And then lastly, the first time that I had to give tough news to a spouse of an employee, that a person that I was working with. I was 22. Nobody ever told me how to do it, and I couldn't have done it any worse. Instead of just getting to the point was, Mrs. Robinson, Bill's had an accident. He slipped on the ice, broke his leg. He's in the hospital. He's okay. Is there anything I can do for you? Can we take you to the hospital? I didn't do that. I dragged it out, and the old guys around me were saying, oh my gosh, what are you doing, Mick? But we never think about these things, that this is what our men and women face. And they, in one moment, they're wondering, is that person going to be pulling a gun on them or coming after them physically, or they have to give bad news. And then what's the reaction to that person? They have to give it with compassion. But at the same time, they have to be prepared for a crazy reaction from the other person. Joe, I don't know, I assume you've faced this before.
Absolutely, Rich. The police department and police officers in general are usually the first of the first responders because we're already out on the street, even ahead of the fire department and the med guys. And so often the things that were most disturbing to me and the things I wish I could unsee during my own career were primarily traffic accidents and suicides. They're soul crushers. Most of them, both categories, suicides and traffic accidents, were generally didn't have to happen. And there's usually a big, long, tragic story that goes along with the suicides that makes them particularly soul-crushing for me from an emotional and spiritual point of view. With one of the first ones I ever had, the father and mother were estranged and in conflict, and Dad comes over while they're visiting the neighbors and sticks a shotgun in his mouth and pulls the trigger with his big toe. Oh, there's his head all over the bedroom there. It's like I said, it's soul crushing. And the fact that he did it in his son's room to give a message to the,
my God!
That was intentional, not only doing himself, but to leave it something for his family to think about the rest of their lives.
And for the police officers that are showing up, I went to a funeral for a subcontractor that had taken his own life, and it was tragic. Difficult business struggles, the IRS big bucks, and the way out he took it was take his own life. And at the end of the memorial service, they went out. He was a cowboy, and they went out, and his daughter unsaddled his horse, and there was nothing more. I got tearied out. We're talking contractors, we're talking tough guys, right? There wasn't a dry eye in the parking lot as she unsaddled the horse, and I can remember took the cowboy boots off the saddle, off the horn, unsaddled the horse, put it all right there on the parking lot, put the lanyard around it, and I can remember the heartache. And I shared with you earlier that one of my coworkers, Bobby Jaramillo, he's coming back from Los Alamos, and he's coming down, as we call, off the hill, and there was a car accident. 2 young people, either late teenagers, early 20s, weren't wearing their seatbelt. Single car accident, and Bobby said they're dying. There's nothing he could do for them, and they're dying right there. And he said there was nothing I could do for them except to be there with them at the end of their life so they didn't die alone. And he said, here I am holding her hand as she took her last breath. And I can remember Bobby. I saw Bobby the next day. He was still shaking. And he said, I just didn't want him to die alone. And this is what I think our police officers, men and women, face.
Since we're the first people there, I mentioned I've had to apply tourniquets to people I was pretty sure weren't going to make it either, and I would give CPR to people that I think were already gone. It's a terrible thing, and there are things, like I said, I wish I could forget that I'd never seen before. Luckily, I never had except where there was other relatives at the scene, I never had to deliver the bad news. The police, generally, you'll see we delay identifying the victims of the accidents and suicides and homicides and everything else. Accidents, that's the other big category. The accidents not auto-related. I always think of auto because it's the ones we usually get. We have about 7 chaplains, and they're trained in that, and they also have access to social workers. And also, the APD really has been forward-thinking in a lot of ways, and they have an aftercare unit, if you will, for victims of homicides and crimes and accidents that to counsel and work with the relatives and the close people.
I hear what you're saying, and here in Albuquerque, we have the benefit of a large force with where we have the chaplains.
Right.
But you take rural New Mexico,
they don't have
what
the resources.
80% of New Mexico
Yeah,
is
it's
rural
rural.
New Mexico. The person giving the tough news is your sheriff,
Right.
your community police officer. They're the ones knocking on the door saying, you know, want to let you know. And the other one is that my daughter, who's now in med school, PA, and she said, and we don't think about this either, is that they have to give bad news to patients. And my daughter started out in as a PA, surgical assist for oncology, and they had to give multiple news to people saying that you're not going to make it. And these things are shared with people, and I think that the people, I think our viewers need to understand just how traumatic that is.
It
Especially,
is.
and you're right, when you talk about the traffic stops, right? Homicide, you're going there, you got an idea, so, you know, somebody's died because it's a homicide, right? And if it's a suicide, you know that the person's gone. But a traffic accident, you're right there in the middle of it.
Right.
And there's no out about it. So when it's done, you have that, or there's a shooting. What's there for services to help the men and women serving in uniform? What do we do to help them?
You know, there are counselors available within the police department. In fact, they have their own psychologists and counselors full time. In fact, and I wish I'd been a little better prepared and had the names I could give you. But there's counseling available for, because they have a lot of things. They have, like you mentioned, witnessing terrible traumas.
Right.
That it's not so much delivering the news. Your only comfort sometimes is your fellow officers are that you did all you could, that you applied the tourniquet, you kept going till the fire and med personnel got there and could take over CPR. You do what you can do. That's the only comfort. And some officers never recover from that. One officer I knew, there was an investigator for that in Four Hills where the 3 kids and the mom were murdered. He quit. He just couldn't take it. He just couldn't. He couldn't see it. Couldn't stand the thought of running into another circumstance so terrible. And I can imagine the people that I understand it was terrific trauma on the people that dealt with that Victoria Martin's case. That's one of the most heinous crimes that I've ever heard of anywhere in the world. Right. The whole thing. But the police department tries, and I have had good friends of mine that counselors available to work with the officers, both on an anonymous basis or not, because right. there's a lot of paranoia amongst the officers as admitting to any weakness that may.
You know what? I've talked to veterans going to the VA that said
same thing.
Right, I'm not going to go there to talk about PTSD because I may lose my right to bear arms.
Yeah.
Same thing with our police department. But for our viewers, they need to be well aware of this. That it's not just the man or woman that's pulling me over, but what they've gone through. We need to have compassion. Not just our police men and women serving in uniform, but we need to have compassion for them. Hey, great that you tuned in today. Listen, this is Mick Rich, to the point. Look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thank you very much.